Hello, this is Paul Chek. Today I thought I would take a minute to teach you a couple of key movement and breathing basics. Unfortunately, the science of breathing and movement is generally not taught in strength and conditioning and personal training certifications, which commonly leads to misunderstandings of how the breathing should be used to facilitate the movement. It's a much deeper topic than I can get into. I teach a 2-day course on this through the Institute. So if you want to know about my workshops and courses that myself and the instructors are running, just go to chekinstitute.com, register yourself on the mailing list, and you can also look at our schedule there. But some basics we'll start with, and then today I'm going to focus on the high cable pull because it's a unique exercise in that there's more than one way to breathe with that exercise because there's variations on the exercise. We do have a recorded presentation by our Chek instructor Dan Hellman from the IDEA conference. It's titled Heavy Breathing by Dan Hellman. It's on DVD through the Chek Institute, which you can go there and in the shopping section, in the product section, you can find that there if you want to get much more information, which is information right out of my course. To begin with, let's look at a couple of key basics. When your body exhales, the whole body moves naturally toward the fetal position. So just remember the fact that exhalation is coupled with flexion of the body, so especially the spine. We're dealing largely with the spine. Respiratory mechanics are governed by the spine. The mechanics of the spine govern what the extremities are doing. Your spine here including your head. So the exhalation action brings the body toward the fetal position, which includes flexion. Adduction means toward the midline, so arms and legs come in, and internal rotation or pronation, so the fetus is in the fetal position. Inhalation is the opposite. Inhalation is extension of the spine, abduction of the extremities away from the midline, and supination, which means you can hold a cup of soup in your hand. So inhalation will excite the muscles that bring you into supination or out of the fetal position. Exhalation, if you just pretend you're blowing a dart through a dart gun like a primal hunter and feel what your body wants to do, it certainly does not go backwards. It goes down toward the fetal position. Now, depending on what a given exercise does to the spine and rib cage, that will determine what the optimal breathing cycle is, so that you actually use the respiratory centers to excite the muscles in a way that is congruent with the exercise you're doing. Some of you may or may not have seen the Chek totem pole, which is a totem, a Native American style totem I built of symbols of hierarchy, all the way at the second to the top symbol, the top being the psyche or consciousness, individual consciousness. The first thing is breathing in the physical body. Research clearly shows that the breathing centers and the breathing system of the body will sacrifice any system it has to the degree that it must change things to enhance your ability to breathe. So for example, if someone's got clogged up nasal passages from poor diet, which is classic, they will develop a forward head posture. Their head will come down and they will have an increased kyphosis, and they may go into a kypholordosis, in other words, increased lordosis, increased forward head posture, increased kyphosis, which is kind of the I lift weights a lot but don't stretch and don't have good technique, kind of silverback gorilla look in the gym. Or you get what's referred to in chiropractic and osteopathic as a C curvature. Head goes down and forward, tail tucks under. Those are all examples of how the respiratory system will change every single thing in your body. When you change posture, you change joint mechanics, you change space for organs, you change how the system pumps. I could give you a long, long list. So we want to remember that the respiratory system is actually the king of the motor system. So how you breathe has everything to do with how well you perform and whether or not you open the door to injuries by breathing backwards or not. If you're breathing backwards, then what you're going to do in many cases is have joints that are in a destabilization phase or a relaxation. The muscles crossing the joints will be relaxed when they should be activated. For example, if you're breathing out while you're doing a deadlift and you're lifting it off the floor, you're setting yourself up for injury because the breathing muscles are telling the pulling muscles to do the opposite of what your brain's trying to get them to do. So what you get is inhibition in the system, which means things aren't tight, stable, and well controlled. It's like having sloppy steering in a car. You can get away with it for a while, but the day you go out and eat something that inflames your gut or have an emotional blowout or drink too much alcohol, and then you go to the gym and you do that, you're likely to end up spending some money somewhere to get fixed up, if you can get fixed up, and you'll keep doing it because you haven't really fixed the problem. So with the cable pull, we're going to look at it from two perspectives. We're going to look at the high cable row, so high cable row or any row like this, and then we're going to look at a sagittal plane high cable row because the mechanics change. So if we grab the cable and we pull, we want to use a reciprocity movement because that helps mobilize the spine. If you try to pull without using your other arm, it localizes the forces to the shoulder and leads to imbalances in your muscle sling systems, which I talk all about in scientific shoulder training. If you want to know a lot more about how the shoulder works and integrates with the systems of the body, the legs, the core, scientific shoulder training has a lot in there for you, whether you're medically trained or not. Okay, so here we're going to look at the pull. I'm going to use a reciprocity movement. Notice now as I pull, my sternum naturally rises up. If my sternum is rising up to facilitate the exercise, it means I'm creating a negative pressure in the thorax, which is coupled with inhalation. As my rib cage gets bigger, if you took my rib cage and opened it real quick, it would cause a vacuum. Okay? So the exercise done with the elbow up, which activates the scapular adductors, which is supportive of good posture, particularly if you do a lot of bench pressing and abdominal work and you're getting pulled down. High cable rows like that with the elbow up in this position needs to be facilitated with inhalation. So the natural breathing cycle would be inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, and that helps keep the rib cage in the optimal position to support the glenohumeral joint. So that's a long discussion, but that's in my scientific shoulder training program. Now, some compensations here. I'm using a light weight. If you get heavy enough that you need to naturally hold your breath to move the weight, so if I jump the weight up here, now it's heavy enough that I could force myself to breathe through it, but it's too heavy. My brain wants to use the respiratory system as a stabilizer system. So remember, the respiratory system has two functions. First, it has respiratory functions. Second, it serves the stabilizer system, which means you can stop breathing to increase recruitment of stabilizers, but obviously for a short period of time, or you go unconscious or become delirious, etc. So now with a heavy load, I'm going to begin by breathing in through my diaphragm, filling my belly, activating my core just by turning those muscles on, which I know I'm doing because I'm drawing the belly button inward. Only the inner unit can do that. And then from there, I'm going to pull the load, and then as I go back, I release the air through pursed lips, which keeps pressure in the core. Now, I cheated there because it's not heavy enough. But if we go up heavy where I can't cheat, you'll see I'm going to have to breathe first. Okay, now that's nice and heavy. Now I can breathe out. Inhale through the core, activate, pull, release. So there you can see the difference between lower intensities, where you can do higher repetitions, but you don't feel like you've got to, shall we say, charge the respiratory system as support for the stabilizer system like you do in higher load or higher intensity training, versus when the weight feels heavy enough you naturally want to hold your breath. Because inhalation excites the pulling muscles, we'll take a deep breath in, activate the system. Now we've oxygenated and excited all the pulling muscles. That facilitates the pull. Don't let your air out too quickly, because that destabilizes the thorax and the spine, because you need intra-abdominal pressure, which can't be effective without intrathoracic pressure. In other words, if you pull your organs in and up, that partially stiffens, but if your air is out, the organs just rise up into the lung space. So when you fill your lungs, you have pneumatic pressure coupled with intra-abdominal pressure. That stiffens the spine up so that you're more stable. These things seem like they're small things, but when you start lifting heavy, one small thing can be the difference between injury and good training. Now, notice carefully that if we take our arm now and we go into the sagittal plane, I'll show you another way to decide what way you should be breathing if you're not sure. If you take that pull and carry it down, now if you put your hand on your sternum, it's not going up anymore, it's starting to go down. So if you're not sure which way to breathe, exaggerate the movement. Ask yourself, if I wanted to keep going, what would I have to do? And to keep that arm going, I would have to actually activate the same muscles you use to do a sit-up or a crunch, which are flexor muscles. So paradoxically, both of these exercises are forms of a high cable pull, but they use opposite breathing patterns because the mechanics of the exercise, particularly on the shoulder, need different types of support to complete that movement. So then you have to be aware to switch your breathing pattern. So if you breathe the way you did with the elbow high while you were doing this, or vice versa, you would not get optimal performance, and you'd be training your brain over time to breathe backwards. And I would say 99.9% of all the elite athletes I've ever evaluated were breathing backwards on many key, if not all, key exercises. And often they would say, well, that's how I was taught to breathe. Well, let's be fair. Not many people teaching exercise have adequate understanding of anatomy and physiology to really realize whether the technique they're teaching is sound or not sound, or physiologically correct or incorrect. They're just teaching what their instructor taught them. I'm giving you an opportunity to learn from someone who knows how the thing works, because I spent my life in a rehabilitation clinic and with surgeons and specialize in medical failures. So needless to say, I've spent 32 years studying all this stuff, okay? So again, now if we're going to go with high intensity, we would then charge the system, inhale big through the belly, draw the core in, and the core will automatically turn on as hard as it needs to, depending on the intensity you're using. So you don't need to suck your belly in so hard that you're wasting energy. If your body's healthy and functional, it'll do that all by itself. But since most people aren't and have guts full of inflammation, which reflexively shuts the core off, I teach it as a technique for reestablishing a healthy motor pathway. So inhale, activate the core, and then pull as you exhale. Inhale. Now if the weight was high, we would go inhale, and then through pursed lips you would pull and then exhale under pressure. You need to have the exhalation coupled with it. Where before I held my breath, this time I may or may not want to hold my breath. If I hold my breath after the inhalation, remember I've got the extensors activated. So to facilitate that flexion, an interesting thing you can do to demonstrate this point, if you fill yourself full of air and then try to bend your spine, you'll notice it's hard to do. But if you let your air out, there you go. So you need some natural trunk flexion, even if your spine doesn't look like it's going into flexion. If you had an electromyogram attached to all your flexor muscles, you'd see as that arm comes closer and closer to the midline of the body, the flexors get more and more excited. So inhaling for a big lift, charged. My recommendation is that more intense the lift, the more pressure you create by tightening your lips, because you need that internal support. And as you're moving through the toughest part of the movement, called the sticking point, you need to have ample air and charge inside of you, which is how you decide how fast or slow to let it go. So for example, if I go back up to a heavy weight, the sticking point in that movement is right there, okay, which is the most inefficient point. So what I want to do before I go is I want to set my breathing pace so I have lots of air still left in me. For example, if I did it like this, I've already got all the air out of me before I get there, so I lose the support from intra-abdominal and intrathoracic pressure. You have to go practice with this and learn to feel what you're doing. This is just an example of one exercise, so now you can see in a workshop I take you through, 15 or 20 key exercises, which gives you the basics in many different ways. But start thinking about this and pay close attention to any exercise where you're moving toward the fetal position. Like if you're on a rowing machine, as you're reaching forward, you should be breathing out. As you're pulling, breathe in. Reaching out, pulling, breathe in. If you start going too fast, then you're going to have to start doing multiple pulls per breath, which isn't such a bad thing, because if you're doing multiple pulls per breath, you know for sure the intensity or the actual resistance you're working against isn't that high, or you couldn't do multiple pulls per breath. So then you're probably safe. Thanks for joining me. Again, references, scientific shoulder training for all sorts of information on how the shoulder pulling and all that integrates with muscle systems, organ systems, you name it. Heavy Breathing by Dan Hellman gives you an overview of the breathing sequences and how they relate to different joints in the body, flexion, extension, abduction, and much more. So thanks for joining me today. Thought I'd give you something just a little different today, and hopefully that'll enhance your gym experience. And when you're breathing right and you get enough oxygen, you can get a natural high while you're lifting weights, which is a better high than you're going to buy with sugar, coffee, and most of the things people are using. See you soon.